Welcome to the LIFFFT series on customer development. Today we're going to be talking about customer interviewing. In particular, we'll be talking about techniques for getting good stories. Now I want to take a moment before we get started to talk a little bit about why you want to get stories. The greatest thing about talking to people and getting their stories is people love telling stories. They get really excited when they tell stories. And it turns out you can start a conversation with someone on the street, ask for a few minutes of their time, a few seconds of their time sometimes, get them telling stories, and talk to them for hours. We've worked with some folks who've even gone back home with people, looked through their closet, talked to them about clothing that they've purchased, learned an amazing amount of stuff. People love to tell stories and they open up a lot when they do. So how do we get them past the, oh, well, I do this once in a while, or trite generalizations about their lives, and to really telling stories? First, I want to talk about tell me about the last time. Tell me about the last time is a great way to get someone starting to tell a story. The reason you ask for the last time and not the best time or the worst time or the most interesting time is that when I walk up to you and say, tell me about the last time you ate. Well, it's very easy to remember the last time you ate. It just happened relatively recently. If I say, tell me about the best thing you've ever eaten, that's a much harder question to answer. You've got to think about it a lot, right? The worst part of that is while you're thinking about it, you're sort of wondering, like, why is this guy asking me this? Why is he bothering me? So tell me about the last time is a great way to get into that storytelling mode. And the really great thing is, once we start talking about the last time we've done something, we sort of have a tendency to jump into more and more interesting stories. I'm sure you've noticed this with your friends, right? Somebody starts telling a story of a thing that happened, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, of course that was interesting that happened, but you'd never imagine what happened 2 weeks ago. So yes and is a technique from the improv community, and the idea there is you want to agree with and build upon what another person says. So when you're talking to a customer, you're doing a customer interview, and they start telling you a story, be really careful not to disagree with or invalidate anything they're saying. And if you can, if you need to jump in and push them a little bit further, say yes and something else, to kind of carry it further down the line. That technique is particularly helpful if somebody's getting a little bit lost in their own story and they need a bit of a push. You want to be careful not to overuse it because it is a little dangerous. You might push them onto a track that they weren't intending to go down. 5 Whys, familiar to those of you who've done Lean Startup before, is all about digging deep into why something is happening and not just assuming that you already know what the answer is or what certain terms mean. A great example of this is when you're talking to a customer, quite often they'll say something like, it was really troublesome for them to complete a task, right? They had a really hard time with it. It was difficult. And you assume, well, I know what difficult means. Difficult means difficult. But maybe when they said difficult, they meant it took more time than they had. Or maybe when they said difficult, it meant it was something they couldn't immediately understand how to do, but if they'd spent 5 seconds researching it, they would have figured it out. So don't assume you know what people mean when they use very simple terminology. We like to say, pretend you're a 5-year-old to some extent and kind of dig into, well, what do you mean by each of these things? Don't assume you share common terminology, especially on those loaded words like difficult, expensive, complex. Dig into what exactly they mean by those things, and you'll get some really great stories as a result of that. Why and tell me more are another 2 great tricks. For folks that like to pitch and really have a hard time letting go of selling, you can just conduct an entire interview with one starting question and then follow it up with just asking questions, just asking why, and just saying, tell me more about a thing you just said. Just why and tell me more can give you an amazing amount of material. And if you find yourself struggling to have a good interview, you keep feeling like you're pushing the conversation in directions you don't want it to go, or you're controlling things too much, I would encourage you just to use why and tell me more. One starting question, why and tell me more from then on out. It's a great way to train yourself to really listen and to not drive the conversation. Another great one is, what do you mean by X? So as we were talking about, when you're digging in with 5 Whys, you want to ask what people mean by certain words. So be really careful if someone uses a term like expensive, like difficult, like complicated, like great. There are a lot of words that it seems like we share a common understanding of, and we really don't. Another great question to ask is, how are you dealing with your problem now? And the reason for that is if they're not dealing with the problem now, if they say, if somehow you get on a track and they hit on the problem that you're excited about, you think it's important, knowing how they deal with it now will give you some really interesting ideas for how you might help others deal with it. Either they're dealing with it in an interesting kind of hacky way that you can amplify and help other people solve, or they're not dealing with it right now. And that's a really interesting point. So the last important piece here is silence is golden. Sometimes it's important to just shut up for a second and let things get awkward. When you're having a great conversation with someone, riffing well, things are working well, you're hearing great stories from them, and they expect you to ask another question, you just wait a little bit longer than is comfortable. They'll answer that question you never thought to ask, right? They'll jump out because they'll want to fill the silence just as much as you do. The key there is you have to be willing to deal with the discomfort of silence longer than they are. Now, you want to be a little careful with this one because it can get really weird if you just never ever say anything. But I will say you can push it a lot further than most of us think without things getting uncomfortable or weird on the other side. And you can learn a lot of amazing things that you never would have thought to ask about. Thanks for watching. I hope you go out there and get some great stories from folks. I love to hear them, and we'll see you next time.